Welcome to Mastermind Conversations, a Pro Insights podcast, powered by Geek in New York, where we don't just talk, we geek it. We break down complex topics, research from trusted sources, and bring your expert insights, real-life stories, and actionable tips, all in a clear and engaging way. So get ready, it's time to geek it with Mastermind Conversations.
All right, welcome back. We're diving back into the sometimes choppy waters of relationship conflict. This is part 3 of our series with Resilient Couples Coaching, strengthening and deepening love with CBT and mindfulness, where we're handing you the tools to not just survive disagreements, but use them to actually strengthen your connection.
It's amazing, how many couples are out there unknowingly using the same conflict resolution tactics that are actually making things worse.
Right.
So let's break down those common pitfalls and give you some practical techniques to turn those clashes into moments that bring you closer.
One thing that really struck me in all the research is the emphasis on truly understanding your partner's perspective, even if you don't see eye to eye in the moment. Why is that so crucial?
It all boils down to empathy. Resilient Couples Coaching talks about building what they call love maps.
Love maps?
Yeah, which is essentially a detailed roadmap of your partner's inner world, their history, their dreams, what makes them tick, even their anxieties. Think of it this way. You wouldn't try to navigate a foreign city without a good map, right?
Right.
Same goes for relationships.
So it's like having a cheat sheet to help you navigate those moments when you feel totally lost in the conversation.
Exactly. And Resilient Couples Coaching has this great exercise where you actually create a love map together, asking each other specific questions to uncover those deeper layers. It's amazing how much closer you can feel just by taking the time to really listen and learn about each other.
But don't couples kind of assume they know each other pretty well already? Especially after years together.
That's where things get tricky. We change and evolve over time, don't we? That's why they also emphasize this "who am I" exercise. It's about acknowledging that the person you married 5, 10, 20 years ago might be different today, and taking the time to rediscover who they are now.
Okay, so we're building these love maps, rediscovering each other. It's like prepping the ground for smoother sailing, right? But what about those everyday moments where conflict pops up?
Here's where the concept of turning card comes into play. Resilient Couples Coaching talks about these little bids for connection that we make all the time, often without even realizing it.
Okay, break that down for me. What's a bid in this context?
Think of it as a tiny attempt to engage with your partner. Could be as simple as sharing a funny meme,
okay,
asking for their opinion on something, or just making eye contact and smiling across the room.
So it's like those little pings we send out, hoping for a positive response.
Precisely. And how we respond to those bids is crucial. Each positive response is like a deposit into what A Million Couples Coaching calls your emotional bank account.
Okay, I like where this is going. So those everyday moments of connection are actually building up a reserve of goodwill for when things get rough.
You got it. Talk about it. Would you rather weather a financial storm with a healthy savings account or an empty one?
Right.
Same principle applies here.
That makes so much sense. Okay, but let's be real. Even with all the love maps and emotional savings in the world, things are going to get heated sometimes. How do we handle those moments when we're on the verge of completely losing it?
Resilient Couples Coaching talks about this phenomenon called flooding, which is essentially when your body's fight or flight response takes over during a conflict. Heart racing, palms sweating, tunnel vision.
Oh yeah, I think we've all been there. What can we do when we sense that wave of intensity coming on, either in ourselves or our partners?
The first step is simply recognizing that is happening. Once you're aware of it, you can start applying some of the de-escalation techniques that Resilient Couples Coaching recommends. Things like taking a time out, focusing on your breath, or even using specific phrases to signal that you need a break.
So it's like hitting the pause button before things escalate into a full-blown shouting match.
Exactly. And those phrases can be super helpful in those moments when you just can't think straight. They emphasize things like, "I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. Can we please take a break and come back to this later?" Or, "Honey, I need a few minutes to cool down before we continue this conversation."
Okay, taking a time out, using those calming phrases. It's like giving ourselves permission to step back from the edge before things spiral. Now, another thing that struck me in the materials is the distinction between solvable and perpetual problems. What's the difference and why does it matter?
This is where things get really interesting. Solvable problems are those everyday logistical things like who's taking out the trash or what you're having for dinner. Pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, those are the ones that ideally have a clear solution. But what about the other kind?
Perpetual problems, on the other hand, are rooted in those fundamental differences in personalities, values, or needs. Think about things like differing levels of tidiness, approaches to money, or even how you express affection. These are the recurring themes that can spark conflict throughout a relationship.
So it's like those underlying fault lines that keep getting triggered.
Exactly. And here's the key. With solvable problems, we're looking for a fix, a resolution. But with perpetual problems, it's more about managing the difference, finding ways to coexist with those contrasting perspectives. Resilient couples coaching calls this accepting influence, which essentially means being open to your partner's point of view, even if you don't agree with it.
Okay, accepting influence. That sounds both crucial and really hard, especially when you feel strongly about something.
It definitely takes practice, but it's at the heart of navigating those perpetual problems. Think of it like this. You and your partner are on a dance floor. You can either try to force each other to dance to the same beat,
right,
which usually leads to stepping on each other's toes, or you can learn to move in harmony even if your steps are slightly different.
I love that analogy. So instead of trying to force our partner to change, we're learning to dance together, even with those differences.
You got it. And that's where those love maps we talked about earlier become so valuable. The more you understand your partner's inner world, their values, their triggers, the easier it becomes to accept those differences and find ways to move together.
That's brilliant. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, and I'm already feeling like I'm gaining some valuable tools for my own relationship. Before we move on, though, there's one more concept I want to touch on. It's this idea that sometimes our own self-justification can actually fuel conflict. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely. Resilient couples coaching draws inspiration from the anatomy of peace, which uses this powerful analogy of a box. When we're in the box, we're essentially seeing our partners as objects rather than people. We're focused on proving our own rightness, justifying our actions, and viewing them as the problem.
So it's like we're building walls instead of bridges.
Exactly. And they share this incredible story about a character named Yusuf, who's trapped in a cycle of resentment and bitterness. He initially sees another character, Mordechai, as the obstacle standing in the way of his happiness. But then something amazing happens.
Well, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What shifted for him?
Yusuf has this moment of genuine compassion for Mordechai. He sees his pain, his humanity, and suddenly everything changes. It's like he steps out of the box and realizes that they're both just human beings trying to navigate this messy thing called life.
That's so powerful. It reminds us that sometimes the biggest battle isn't with our partner, but with our own perceptions and judgments.
That's the core of it. And Resilient Couples Coaching suggests some practical ways to get out of that box. It starts with awareness, noticing when we're clinging to our need to be right, and then making a conscious effort to see our partners as people with their own needs, fears, and vulnerabilities, just like us.
Like we're choosing to disarm and approach the situation with curiosity and compassion instead of weapons. Okay, that's some serious food for thought. I think we'll leave it there for now, but we'll be back soon to dive into even more practical strategies for transforming conflict into connection. In the meantime, listeners, what's resonating with you so far? What's one takeaway you're holding on to as we head into part 2?
It's fascinating to know how even the smallest actions can create a ripple effect in our relationships.
You're so right. It's like those tiny pebbles causing waves in a pond.
Precisely. And speaking of ripples, one source we explored, The Anatomy of Peace, really dives into how our own need to be right can actually create those waves of conflict.
That sounds counterintuitive. Can you explain that a bit more?
Well, the source uses this powerful analogy of a box. When we're in the box, we're essentially viewing our partner as the problem, the obstacle to our own happiness.
So it's like we're putting them in a category rather than seeing them as the complex individual they are.
Exactly. We're so focused on proving our own rightness and justifying our own actions that we lose sight of their perspective completely.
It's almost like we're building a case against them instead of building a bridge of connection.
That's a great way to put it. And the source goes on to explain that when we're in the box, we tend to see our partners as objects rather than people. We dehumanize them in our minds.
That's a sobering thought. It makes you wonder how often we do that without even realizing it.
It happens more often than we'd like to admit. The source shares this compelling story about a character named Yusuf who's struggling with resentment and bitterness. He sees another character, Mordechai, as the source of his problems, as someone who's intentionally wronging him.
So he's trapped in that box. seeing Mordecai as the enemy.
Yes, but then there's this pivotal moment where Yusuf experiences a surge of genuine compassion for Mordecai. He sees his pain, his humanity, and suddenly everything shifts. He steps out of the box.
Wow, that must have been a powerful turning point. What happened next?
That act of seeing Mordecai as a person opened the door to understanding, forgiveness, and connection. It broke down those walls of resentment that Yusuf had built up.
It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest obstacle to resolution isn't our partner's behavior, but our own perception of them.
You've hit the nail on the head. And Resilient Couples Coaching offers some practical steps for getting out of the box. One key is becoming aware of our own need to be right, that inherent self-justification that can fuel conflict. Another is to practice empathy, to put ourselves in our partner's shoes and try to see the world through their eyes.
So it's about shifting our focus from being right to being connected.
That's a powerful way to put it. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of conflict resolution that we touched on briefly in part 1, the idea that men and women sometimes approach communication in very different ways.
Oh, that's a topic that's always intrigued me. What insights did Resilient Couples Coaching offer on that?
They draw a lot from men are from Mars, women are from Venus, which, as you might guess, suggests that men and women sometimes speak different languages when it comes to communication.
And this, of course, can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings.
Absolutely. The book explains that men often retreat into their caves when stressed or overwhelmed. They seek solitude to process their emotions and regain their sense of equilibrium.
So it's like that classic scenario where a woman wants to talk about her feelings and the man just wants to be left alone.
That's a perfect example. Women, on the other hand, tend to ride emotional waves. They seek connection and understanding to navigate their feelings.
So they're looking to process those feelings externally, while men are more internal.
Exactly. And without understanding these fundamental differences, it's easy to misinterpret our partner's actions and intentions.
So a woman might see a man's withdrawal as a sign of rejection or a lack of caring, when in reality, he just needs some time to himself.
Precisely. And a man might see a woman's need to talk as an attempt to control or to fix him, when in reality, she just wants to feel heard and understood.
It's fascinating how these different approaches to communication can create such a disconnect.
You're so right. And men are from Mars, women are from Venus offers some helpful translations to bridge that communication gap. It encourages women to be direct and clear in their communication, expressing their needs without blaming or criticizing. And it encourages men to practice active listening, validating their partner's feelings, even if they don't fully understand them.
So it's about learning to speak each other's language and to recognize that what feels supportive to one person might not feel supportive to the other.
That's a great takeaway. And this understanding of communication styles is crucial for another key aspect of conflict resolution that we've mentioned before: timing.
Timing, the art of choosing your battles. Could you elaborate on why timing is so crucial when it comes to resolving conflict?
Well, think back to those caves and waves we were just discussing. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, emphasizes the importance of recognizing when your partner is in their cave or riding a wave, and choosing your moments for those crucial conversations accordingly.
So trying to initiate a heartfelt conversation when a man is deep in his cave is probably not going to end well.
Probably not. The book suggests waiting until he's emerged from his cave and is feeling more emotionally available before bringing up sensitive topics.
It's like trying to have a serious discussion during a hurricane. It's just not the right time or place.
That's a great analogy. And for women, it's about recognizing those emotional waves. If a woman is at the bottom of her wave, feeling vulnerable and overwhelmed, that's probably not the best time to bring up a challenging topic or to ask for support.
So it's about being sensitive to each other's emotional needs and rhythms.
Exactly. It's about choosing your moments wisely and being mindful of your partner's emotional state.
All of this is giving us a lot to think about. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. But there's one concept that keeps coming back to me as particularly powerful: the idea that our own self-justification can actually fuel conflict.
I agree. That concept from the Anatomy of Peace is truly transformative. It reminds us that we have a choice in how we perceive our partner and how we approach conflict. We can choose to stay trapped in the box, clinging to our self-righteousness and blaming them for our unhappiness.
Or we can choose to step out of that box to see them as a person. with their own needs, fears, and vulnerabilities.
And to approach the situation with curiosity, compassion, and a genuine desire to connect.
That's beautifully said. It sounds like a much more peaceful and fulfilling path.
It certainly is, and the research from Resilient Couples Coaching supports this. Their findings consistently show that couples who are able to let go of that need to be right, and who approach conflict with empathy and understanding, are much more likely to create a lasting and loving relationship.
So it's not about winning the argument, but about winning the relationship.
That's a great way to put it. And Resilient Couples Coaching offers some practical tools to help us do just that. We've talked about love maps, turning towards, bids for connection, recognizing flooding, and understanding those different communication styles between men and women.
And we've also touched on the importance of timing and the power of empathy.
All of these concepts are interwoven, working together to create a foundation of understanding and connection that can help us navigate conflict constructively.
It's giving me hope that even the most challenging conflicts can be transformed into opportunities for growth and deeper intimacy.
Me too. And remember, even small changes can make a big difference. Just like those tiny petals creating ripples in a pond, each act of kindness, each attempt to understand, each effort to connect can create waves of positive change in your relationship.
What an inspiring thought. This has been such a rich and thought-provoking deep dive. As we wrap up this part of our exploration, I'm curious to hear what stood out to you as particularly important. What insights resonated most deeply?
One of the most powerful takeaways for me is the realization that conflict is an inevitable part of any relationship. It's not about avoiding conflict altogether, but about learning to navigate it in a way that strengthens our bond rather than tearing it apart. And Resilient Couples Coaching and the other sources we've explored offer so much hope. Hope that even the most deeply ingrained patterns can be shifted. That understanding can replace blame, and that connection can triumph over disconnection.
Those are incredibly powerful reminders. What about you, listeners? What stood out to you from this part of our deep dive? What insights are you taking away as you continue to navigate your own relationship journeys? We'll be back soon with the final part of this series to explore even more strategies for creating stronger, more fulfilling relationships. But in the meantime, we'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections. Welcome back to our deep dive into resolving those, inevitable relationship conflicts. We're continuing our exploration with Resilient Couples Coaching, strengthening and deepening love with CBT and mindfulness. And this time we're getting into the nitty-gritty of communication. Specifically, how to avoid those little traps that can turn a minor disagreement into a full-blown argument.
It's amazing how often we kind of sabotage our own attempts at resolution just by using the wrong words, the wrong tone, or even the wrong timing.
Right. So it's like we're accidentally pouring gasoline on a fire that could have been, easily contained.
Yeah.
What are some of those communication pitfalls we should be aware of?
Well, Resilient Couples Coaching really stresses the importance of avoiding what they call harsh startups. These are those critical or accusatory statements that immediately put your partner on the defensive.
Okay, can you give me an example of a harsh startup?
Imagine you come home from work exhausted and the house is a mess. A harsh startup might sound like, "Why is this place always such a disaster? Do you even care?"
Ouch. Yeah, I can see how that would instantly trigger a defensive reaction. So what's the alternative?
Resilient Couples Coaching suggests focusing on expressing your own feelings and needs, using I statements. So instead of blaming or attacking, you might say, "I'm feeling overwhelmed by the clutter. Could we please work together to tidy up?"
It's like shifting the focus from blaming your partner to expressing your own experience in a way that invites collaboration.
Exactly. And it's not just about the words themselves, but also the tone of voice and body language. Approaching the conversation with a sense of calm and respect can make all the difference.
It makes me think about the concept of men retreating into their caves that we discussed earlier. I bet those harsh startups are like poking a bear in its den.
You're absolutely right. Resilient Couples Coaching draws on the work of men are from Mars, women are from Venus, which highlights that men are particularly sensitive to feeling criticized or disapproved of. So those harsh startups can be especially triggering for them.
So even seemingly harmless comments can unintentionally trigger those negative feelings. What's the key to avoiding those communication mishaps? Especially when we're dealing with those inherent differences between men or women.
Well, men are from Mars, women are from Venus offers some insightful translations to help couples understand how their words might be interpreted by the other. For example, if a woman says, "This house is always a mess," a man might hear, "You're a slob, and I'm constantly cleaning up after you."
So it's not just about the words themselves, but the unspoken accusations that might be attached to them.
Exactly. The book says that women focus on expressing their needs directly and respectfully, rather than framing them as criticisms. So instead of saying, "This house is always a mess," she might say, "I'm feeling overwhelmed by the clutter, and I would really appreciate your help in tidying up."
It's like choosing to be an ally rather than an adversary. I love that. Now, what about those moments when we do find ourselves getting defensive or heated? Are there any, magic phrases that can help us de-escalate the situation before it spirals out of control?
Absolutely. Resilient couples coaching has a whole toolbox of what they call repair attempts, which are phrases designed to de-escalate conflict and keep the conversation flowing in a positive direction. Things like, "I can see your point, I'm sorry that came out wrong," or even a simple, "Can we take a break?" can work wonders.
It's like having a first aid kit for those emotional bumps and bruises that are bound to happen in any relationship.
Exactly. And successful couples are masters of repair attempts. They recognize when things are starting to go off track and use these phrases to steer the conversation back to a place of connection.
This makes me think that conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's how we handle it that determines whether it brings us closer or pushes us further apart.
You've hit the nail on the head. And all those tools we've been discussing, love maps, turning towards, understanding flooding, mastering communication, these are all essential skills for navigating conflict in a healthy way.
Speaking of healthier relationship habits, I remember one more key concept that really stood out in the source material. Can you remind us about the importance of appreciation?
Appreciation. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, emphasizes the importance of acknowledging and appreciating the efforts our partners make. Even those seemingly small, everyday things, it's about making those deposits into that emotional bank account we talked about earlier.
So those little acts of appreciation, those thank yous and gestures of affection, those are the things that keep that balance in check.
Exactly. They build up that reserve of goodwill that can help us weather the storms when they inevitably arise.
It's like we're investing in the long-term health and happiness of our relationship.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about grand gestures. It's about those small, everyday moments of connection and appreciation that truly make a difference.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling incredibly inspired by all of this wisdom. It's like we've been given a treasure map to navigate the often challenging terrain of relationships.
I feel the same way. And remember, we don't have to master all of these skills overnight. Even small, consistent efforts can create a ripple effect of positive change.
So, dear listeners, as we wrap up this deep dive into resolving conflict, what's one action you're going to take today to strengthen your own relationships? Maybe it's expressing your appreciation to your partner, practicing a softened startup, or simply taking a moment to truly listen and understand their perspective. Remember, even the smallest steps can lead to profound transformations.
And remember, conflict is an inevitable part of any relationship. It's not about avoiding it altogether, but about learning to navigate it in a way that strengthens your bond and brings you closer together.
Beautifully said. Until next time, may your relationships be filled with love, laughter, and the wisdom to navigate those inevitable bumps along the way.
That's a wrap for this episode of Mastermind Conversations, a Pro Insights podcast powered by Geek in New York, where we don't just talk, we geek it. We hope you gained valuable insights, learned something new, and are ready to apply it in business and life. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us bring you even more great content. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and always geek it.